the night watcher. The campfire crackled, sending faint sparks into the cool night air as James stared into the darkness. His friends were already tucked into their tents, leaving him alone to keep watch. The surrounding forest was thick, with towering pine trees swaying gently in the wind. The air was unusually still, and the usual symphony of nocturnal creatures had gone eerily silent. James' grip tightened around his flashlight as a sense of unease crept over him. He thought he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, just a flicker, a shadow dancing at the edge of the firelight. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, he shifted uncomfortably on the log he was sitting on. Then he heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the forest floor. They were slow, almost methodical, as if something or someone was circling the camp. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. James's heart pounded in his chest as he turned the flashlight toward the noise. Nothing. The trees stood silent, their branches swaying in the wind, but the footsteps persisted. He stood up, holding his breath, and called out, "Who's there?" His voice echoed back at him, swallowed by the darkness. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then a low growl echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. He spun around, shining the light frantically in every direction, but there was no one there. Just the darkness, thick and oppressive. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the firelight, a tall, shadowy silhouette with glowing red eyes watching him. James froze in place, his mind racing. The figure didn't move, just stood there, its eyes locked on him. His flashlight flickered, the beam weakening as the figure took a step closer. Panic surged through James as he backed away, but his legs felt heavy, rooted to the ground. The figure took another step and then another, until it was just inches away. The fire sputtered out with a hiss, plunging the campsite into total darkness. In the morning, his friends awoke to find James missing. All that remained was his flashlight, still flickering weakly, and a set of large, clawed footprints in the dirt, leading deep into the woods. The Whispering Woods. The campfire crackled as the group huddled close, sharing ghost stories under the canopy of stars. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the familiar sounds of the forest at night. Owls hooted in the distance, and the leaves whispered their own ancient secrets. But as the stories went on, something changed. The wind picked up, but this time it carried more than just the rustling of leaves. The whispers started faint, barely audible, as if carried by the breeze. At first, no one noticed, attributing the sound to the wind. But then Sarah, always the skeptic, heard her name. Her head snapped up, eyes scanning the dark tree line just beyond the flickering firelight. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice shaky. The others exchanged confused glances but shook their heads. They continued with their stories, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. This time it wasn't just her name, it was a plea, a desperate call for help. "Sarah, help us!" Her heart pounded as she stood up, edging closer to the dark woods. "Who's out there?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer came, only the persistent, haunting whispers that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. She stepped toward the trees, feeling the pull of something unseen, something malevolent. The deeper she ventured into the woods, the colder it became. The air, once filled with the warmth of the fire, now felt icy and suffocating. The whispers surrounded her, disembodied voices calling her name, urging her deeper into the darkness. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal hands reaching out to grab her. Suddenly, a hand, cold as death, clamped down on her shoulder. Sarah spun around, but there was no one there. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled backward, trying to find her way back to camp. The whispers were deafening now, screaming her name from all directions. When she finally reached the clearing, the fire was out and the campsite was empty. Her friends, their tents, even the campfire were gone. The only thing that remained was the oppressive silence and the whispers, forever haunting the woods, forever calling her name. The phantom camper. They had noticed it the moment they arrived at the remote campground, a lone weathered tent set up just a few hundred meters down the trail. It looked old, like it had been there for years, forgotten by time. The fabric was frayed, and the metal poles were rusted, but something about it felt unsettling. Curiosity got the better of them, and after setting up their own tents, the group decided to investigate. The air was thick with tension as they approached the old campsite. The tent flaps fluttered weakly in the breeze, and an eerie stillness surrounded the area. No animals, no insects, just silence. Inside the tent, they found old camping gear, lanterns, worn sleeping bags, and an old waterlogged journal. The pages were stained and torn, but still legible. The entries were bizarre, describing someone who had camped in this very spot, but something had gone wrong. The writer spoke of being watched, followed by something that lurked in the woods, always just out of sight. The last entry was dated 5 years ago. It was a frantic scribble. "It's still out there. I can feel it. Watching. Waiting. I don't think I'll make it out alive." That night, the group sat around their fire, the eerie feeling from earlier still lingering. As the night wore on, they began to hear noises, the snap of twigs, the rustle of leaves, coming from the direction of the old tent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and dragging, as if something or someone was approaching. They grabbed their flashlights, shining them toward the noise. The beam illuminated nothing but trees and empty space, but the footsteps continued, growing louder, circling the camp. Panic set in as the sound grew closer, almost too close. When they finally mustered the courage to check the old tent again in the morning, it was gone. No trace of it remained, as if it had never been there. The last campfire. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway for a group of friends seeking an escape from city life. They arrived at the campsite as the sun set, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was crisp, and the scent of pine surrounded them. They set up their tents near a tranquil lake, excited for their adventure. As night fell, they gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. Laughter filled the air, but as the tales grew darker, the mood shifted. One friend, Mike, shared a local legend about a camper who went missing in these woods long ago. It was said he had made a deal with an ancient spirit, a pact that cost him his life. Legend has it, Mike leaned closer, if you hear the campfire crackle 3 times in a row, you should leave immediately. It's the spirit's warning. The group chuckled nervously, but the fire crackled once, then twice. They exchanged glances, dismissing it. But when the fire crackled a 3rd time, laughter ceased. The air grew colder and tension settled over them. Ignoring the warning, they continued their stories. Later that night, Sarah awoke to whispering outside, faint yet distinct, calling her name. Heart racing, she unzipped her tent and stepped out. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, casting eerie shadows around the campsite. The whispering grew louder, echoing through the trees. "Come, join us!" It beckoned her toward the woods. Dread filled her, but curiosity tugged at her feet. Just as she stepped closer, a hand grabbed her wrist. It was Mike, his face pale. "We need to leave, now," he urged. They rushed to wake the others, panic rising, but as they turned back to the campfire, it roared to life, flames licking the sky like hungry serpents. Whispers intensified, swirling around them, enveloping them in darkness. The last thing they heard before the fire extinguished was a chorus of voices chanting, "Join us! Join us!" When the sun rose, only their belongings remained. No trace of the friends, just the remnants of a cold, silent campfire. The cursed trail. The sun dipped below the horizon as the group of campers set off on a well-known trail, excited to explore the wilderness. They had heard stories about the trail, known for its breathtaking views, but also for its dark history. Many who ventured too deep into the woods never returned, and whispers of an ancient curse lingered among the locals. Despite the warnings, their adventurous spirits led them on. As they hiked, the atmosphere shifted. The trees grew denser, and the sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy above. Shadows danced ominously around them, and a chilling breeze rustled the leaves. Halfway through their journey, they stumbled upon a clearing with a massive, gnarled tree at its center. Its bark was twisted and blackened, as if charred by an unseen fire. The group gathered around it, snapping photos and joking about the haunted tree. But as they stood there, an unsettling feeling washed over them. One by one, they began to hear faint voices calling their names, echoing through the air. Confused and frightened, they decided to turn back, but the path seemed to shift. What was once a clear trail now twisted into a labyrinth of trees. Panic set in as they realized they were lost. Night fell swiftly, and the darkness closed in around them. With no choice but to keep moving, they stumbled through the underbrush, desperately trying to find a way back. But the voices grew louder, more insistent, as if the forest itself was alive, guiding them deeper into its embrace. After what felt like hours, they reached the clearing again. The tree loomed before them, but something was different. The bark now pulsed with a faint, sickly glow. They could feel a malevolent presence, as if the tree was watching them. In a frenzy, they decided to leave, but the voices turned into screams, pleading for them to stay. With adrenaline coursing through their veins, they sprinted through the forest, branches clawing at their clothes. Just as they thought they'd escaped, the forest fell silent. They halted, catching their breath, but the silence was unnerving. Then a bone-chilling laugh echoed around them. When morning arrived, they found themselves back at the campsite, as if nothing had happened. Yet as they looked around, they realized they were not alone. The tree stood tall, now a haunting reminder of their encounter. They left the forest with a heavy sense of dread, knowing the curse of the trail would linger on, waiting for its next victims. For more, subscribe and let the demon haunt you if you do not open the notifications.